Hey, are you ready to go down under? What, you don't have any scuba gear? That's okay. I'll lend you my second octo. And let's dive down and explore the wonderful world of underwater coral and what that biome can offer the fantasy world builder. Imagine a home beneath the waves, the architect of your house, a creature as diverse as its environment. Coral would be the builder of this place, and it would form the home of amazing, fantastical creatures that could feed your magic system, shape your religion, and form the bedrock of the cultures that live in, around, and on the coral reef. Envision a civilization of merfolk swimming between the columns of water, or a sea otter transforming into a human as it walks out onto the beach. From myths that echo in sailors' tales to sacred rites held in underwater temples, that is what I want to talk about today. Coral reefs and the enormous value that they can add to your fantasy world. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time, or welcome back if you're a subscriber. So today we are continuing my long-running series on world-building biomes. And if you're interested in other biomes, there's a playlist right over there for you to check out. Today, the topic is coral reefs, and appropriately, the first thing to talk about is coral itself. Now, if you look at coral, you might think that they're a family of plants, but this would be incorrect. Coral is actually living animals. Each coral is made up of hundreds, sometimes thousands of tiny creatures called polyps. These polyps secrete calcium carbonate, building the hard rock-like structures we know as coral reefs. But here is where it gets fascinating. Coral houses microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. I did not pronounce that right. It's on the whiteboard. These algae are hosted within their tissues, which through photosynthesis provides the coral with nutrients. It's an amazing symbiosis between the algae and the animal that creates the magic of coral. At least this is the case with shallow water corals, which is what I'm going to talk about today. The reefs we discuss today are shallow enough that sunlight still penetrates and photosynthesis is possible, and this symbiotic relationship exists between algae and coral. There are deep water reefs that function very differently, and I might explore them in another biome video. If you would like me to do a video on deep water reefs, comment down below and let me know. Okay, so back to shallow water coral reefs. One of the most fascinating parts of coral is how it spawns. It is a very synchronized event, and it happens mostly annually with a mass spawning where they just toss out the gametes into the ocean and hope that these gametes will find each other and make little itty-bitty baby corals. The timing of this event varies depending on the coral species and their locations, but the general rule is that it happens after a full moon because the lunar cycle does have a significant role in the timing. And this is, of course, because the moon affects the tides, as I discuss in my video on multiple moons. For the spawning to take place, there must also be a rise in water temperature, so the late spring or early summer is ideal. And it typically happens at night, which is thought to help protect the eggs from predators and the sun. So this spawning event would likely have a large impact on societies that live on or near coral reef biomes. And that is a topic we will talk about a little later in this video, so stick around for that. Now, I did mention that coral builds these undersea houses, and of course, they are the reef builders. They are the foundation animal of the reef, which is to say, the biome cannot exist without them. But they are more than just undersea structures. They protect coastlines from erosion and from adverse weather. They provide nurseries for sea life where juvenile fish can grow up in relative safety. Medically beneficial compounds are harvested from coral, even in our world. Of course, in a world where you have magic, you can enhance this by having it not just be something that physiologically reacts, but also is magical. And that is something else we will talk about a little later when we talk about the magic of coral. Now, in your world, coral could be a sacred place of power where water mages draw strength, or it could be the backbone of an underwater economy, trading in precious minerals and magical pearls. Coral is already a rich environment in our world. Add a little magic and it truly becomes the home of fantasy. So if you enjoyed this conversation about coral itself, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about the fauna and flora that you find in a coral reef. Before we go under the water, let's talk about above the water. The frigate bird is a fascinating species that has several adaptations that make it very well suited for life associated with coral reefs. These birds are also known as the pirates of the sky, which is just an amazing name. Their wingspan is enormous relative to their body size, allowing them to soar on the thermal updrafts above the sea for weeks. And this allows them to stay out to sea and not land and get waterlogged. Now, they're called pirates of the sky because of their feeding strategy. They are kleptoparasites, meaning they often obtain their food by stealing it from another bird. They literally just steal the fish right out of the mouth of other birds, though they are also adept hunters themselves and can pluck fish and squid from the ocean's surface. In a fantasy world, they could represent a graceful and strategic thief that has the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. Now, moving one step down from the sky, let's talk about air-breathing animals, and we're going to split this into two and talk about reptiles and mammals. In the reptile category, let's start with green turtles. With their streamlined shells and powerful flippers, these are the long-distance travelers of the marine world, and they migrate incredible distances, always returning to their spawning beach to lay their eggs. They can hold their breath for several hours while resting, but when they are actively foraging, they usually hold their breath for about 5 minutes before surfacing for air. I've seen green turtles sleeping, and it is the most amazing thing. They sort of drift right above the coral in a sheltered spot, and they just don't pay attention to anything. Like they're just taking a nap down there. It's awesome. The diet of the green turtle is mainly seagrass and algae, which is pretty important because it prevents the overgrowth and maintains the health and balance of the seagrass beds. Green turtles in a fantasy world could be ancient navigators of the seas, or they could act as living vessels for underwater species. They could also, in and of themselves, evolve to sentience and civilization and become an amphibious sentient species. Though you'll have to make a plan with their hands because those paws aren't made for tools. Now, as I said, we are splitting the air-breathing section in two, And the other animal that we're going to talk about is sea otters. They are just the most awesome animals. They are known to hold their breath for up to 5 minutes, and they are a keystone species in the kelp forest ecosystem, which is often the neighbor of the coral reef ecosystem. Keystone species means that they are critical to the health of the ecosystem. The primary diet of the sea otter consists of sea urchins, crabs, snails, and small fish. And they can actually crush shellfish open on their chest using rocks, which is just the most cutest thing ever, though I guess it sucks for the shellfish. Anyway, by controlling the sea urchin population, sea otters prevent the overgrazing of kelp forest, which is a critical habitat and feeding ground for many marine species. Sea otters in a fantasy world with their dexterous paws and their playful nature could very easily become a sentient species, either in their own right or as shapeshifters, and we will talk more about that a little later on, so stay tuned. But sea otters could also just be mischief makers in a marine community. Perhaps they could become the holy animal of a god of mischief, which would be a very interesting role for them to fulfill. Okay, so those are the two sample animals of creatures that need to come up to breathe. But what about those that are water breathing? There are, of course, a myriad of these animals. The first one I want to talk about is the parrotfish. Sporting a rainbow of colors and equipped with a wicked beak, the parrotfish is like a living kaleidoscope, but it is critical to the reef's vitality. They graze on the algae-laden corals in a process that prevents the algae from choking the reef. With each munch, the parrotfish actually ingests bits of coral, and its digestive tract grinds the coral into fine sands, which it then deposits. And that helps create those white sand beaches associated with coral reefs. In fact, a single parrotfish can produce hundreds of pounds of white sand each year. In a fantasy world, if you have druids or something like that, I can see parrotfish becoming important to such a society as an animal that enhances the environment, both by creating those beaches and by maintaining the balance between the algae and the reef. And with a parrotfish's vibrant colors and transformative work in creating sand, they could easily become the symbols of renewal and cyclical balance, a very in-keeping thematic element of druidic orders. But of course, everything that eats has things that eat it, and there's always a bigger fish, in the words of Qui-Gon Jinn. The potato bass is a pretty formidable predator. Its mottled skin provides great camouflage, and it can strike with lightning speed to snag its prey. Now, the potato bass is a really cool fish, and the reason why it's in this video is because of this piece of footage where you can see this potato bass actually playing with us. He just really wanted to go to Fishy Spa and have everybody pet him. It was awesome. He was literally swimming into us. So that's why the potato bass are here, and they really are awesome. But they are, of course, not the only predator on the reef. There is also the moray eel, which winds through the nooks and crannies of the reef and launches its attacks from ambush. They use their second set of jaws, called pharyngeal jaws, to grasp and pull prey into their gullets. Because if the jaws open wide and there's more jaws inside, it's a moray. Seriously, it's a remarkable adaptation that seems to be pulled straight from a creature feature. In the realm of fantasy, these hunters could be guardians of sacred treasure, or they could be keepers of underwater ruins. Or you can make that moray large and offer a serious threat to anybody who visits the reef. Now, it is a simple fact of life that everything needs to be clean. I have in a previous video spoken a great deal about cleaning stations underwater, so I'm not going to rehash everything I said there. You can check that video out over there in the information card. But I do want to just briefly talk about the importance of symbiosis, because that's something we'll talk about again when it comes to magic. So cleaner shrimps and wrasses have a symbiotic relationship with their fellow marine inhabitants. They set up these cleaning stations, and the other marine inhabitants come to have parasites and dead skin removed. Even creatures like the giant manta rays will patiently wait in line at a cleaning station and then come park themselves in the station to be cleaned. Without the cleaning crew, the reef would succumb to the perils of disease and parasites. Now, these cleaning stations could be used as a healing station in a fantasy world. Maybe these cleaning crew are natural magic users who heal things that they clean. And then you could even have people from the surface coming down to the cleaning station to visit these natural healers, which I think would be a really cool fantasy element. There are, of course, a myriad of other creatures. I haven't even spoken about the octopus, though I did talk about them extensively in another video, which I did on illusions. And then, of course, there are sharks, who are the apex predator. And if you've ever been on a reef when a great white appears, you immediately know it. Everything else on the reef disappears, and the Jaws music starts playing in your head, even though you know it's not actually interested in eating you. But we've got a lot of ground to cover. So let me just say that sea snakes would be great for some kind of association with assassins, for example, harvesting their poison as a deadly substance. Electric rays would be awesome for power generation or life detection, and kelp forests would be an amazing place to hide anything, since it's super easy to get turned around in there. Okay, so if you've enjoyed this quick take on fauna and flora in coral reefs, hit that thumbs up button, and let's turn to coral magic. I promised we would talk about symbiosis, and so we will. Consider the intricate relationship that defines the reef between coral and algae. In a similar vein, we can imagine a form of symbiotic magic where power is drawn from the bonds between creatures. This magic could manifest in partnerships, like a shark and its remoras, or the mutualistic relationship that forms in cleaning stations. In a fantasy realm, a mage or magical creature might form bonds with each other, each pair enhancing the magical abilities and power of the other. These alliances could be a central part of the magic system, where understanding and respect for each other are as crucial as the spells themselves. This would open up thematic storytelling devices where you could tell stories about broken bonds, rejoining bonds, and the need for mutual support. But the coral reef is also a place of death, where the skeletal remains of corals form the foundation of new life. This cycle can inspire a form of necromantic magic, drawing power from death to create, shape, and transform. But here lies a moral dilemma: the temptation to abuse this power by causing premature death for magical gain. Such a magic system can introduce complex ethical questions. It can challenge characters to consider the consequences of their actions, weighing the need for magical power against the sanctity of life. And that can make for an amazing central conflict to an epic fantasy tale. The coral reef, with its myriad relationships and cycles and its extremely rich environment, is more than just an ecological marvel. It's an absolute treasure trove of magical possibilities. So think about those intricate connections that is formed on the coral reef. Think about its biodiversity. Think about the different elements that form it. Could it be a source for elemental magic? It lives underwater. It also touches the earth. There are creatures on it that transform the coral into sand. Could that be part of an elemental system? There are many aspects to the coral reef that you can build into a fantastical world to form the bedrock of your fantasy elements. And if you enjoyed that exploration of the magic of coral, hit that thumbs up button and let's talk about cultures and societies that might exist on a coral reef. As with animals, we'll split societies into two. Those adapted to diving down and visiting the reef, and those who are not so adapted. In other words, the more classical humans or elves or whatnot. If you want my take on completely underwater societies, I have done a number of videos on underwater civilizations, and you can check those out in the playlist. Okay, let's first talk about shapeshifters that are adapted to diving. And let's circle back to that sea otter. In our own folklore, there is the legend of selkies, which are creatures that can transform between human and otter, and they have the ability to live as a marine animal or as a human. That kind of shape-shifting ability opens up great narrative potential with themes of transformation, identity, and belonging. You could explore the struggle of living between two worlds, never fully belonging in either. This would be particularly suited to young adult novels where you have young shapeshifters coming of age and learning to navigate both the human and aquatic world. In modern fantasy, we see echoes of these themes in works like The Song of the Sea, where the protagonists grapple with their connection to the ocean. This kind of device also plays into themes of guardians of the reef, because these people live as sea creatures some of the time. As such, they might have extensive stewardship of the reef. So you could also play with themes around taking care of the natural world, where that could battle threats like pollution and overfishing and so on. The culture of these people would be well suited to rituals and traditions tied to the rhythms of the reef and, of course, the moon. You might have celebrations aligning with coral spawning events, and you would probably have myths around creatures of the deep teaching lessons of balance and harmony and the respect for nature. I could certainly see a green turtle god in a culture of such a society. But we'll talk a bit more about my general thoughts on religions that could arise in reef societies in the last section of this video. For now, let's leave the shape-changing otter be and talk about an amphibious civilization, fully adapted to live on both the reef and under the water. These amphibious beings, descendants of an aquatic ancestor, would possess unique psychological traits. They might have gills for underwater breathing that would seal when they come up, with webbed hands and feet for expert swimming. Perhaps even specialized eyes, adapted to the varying light conditions of the deep and sunlit lands. Or maybe they like the turtle, who have an immense lung capacity, and they basically hold their breaths under the ocean. I think that their home should ideally be built in environments like mangroves or other kinds of halfway environments, where they would have the water close at hand, even washing into the home during high tide, but it also has enough dry area for them to breathe freely and be safe. These amphibious people would probably have a deep connection to the sea, diving for pearls, fishing and harvesting coral, which all could be part of their routine. They probably trade with other species that are less adapted to marine life. They might even have domesticated some of the fish species, like the potato bass or the parrotfish, that they use as a food source or perhaps as a means to make some other products. These people would be a very interesting, fantastical element, and they would open up some great themes. Again, they will open up the dual nature of living partially underwater and partially on land. And in that liminal space, you could play with a lot of themes of being caught between two worlds. You could also set up a situation where they have the demands of the land, perhaps requiring more and more trade, and you have the pressure that this is putting on the ocean. And so you can play with themes of progress versus stewardship in the same way that Tolkien did in The Lord of the Rings. So those are two examples of societies where they would live both on land and visit the ocean with adaptations. But what about societies that are like our world, that are societies that live on the reef but aren't specifically adapted to diving down to it? Now, I have already done a coastal societies video in general, which you can check out, but just as an overview, in a society where the reef is a cornerstone of the existence of the society, the reef could become woven into the fabric of the culture. They could have rituals and festivals centered around the reef, where you have myths that are told of the sea gods residing within the coral themselves. Or you could perhaps have festivals when the turtles come to lay their eggs. The society would move to the rhythm of the reef. And if their magic is dependent on the reef, their relationship to it will deepen even further. So it could become the source of mystical power, a place of learning and discovery. These societies, with their added dimension of magic, could transform the coral reef from a natural resource into a living, breathing entity at the mystical heart of their society. And if you enjoyed that discussion of societies that could exist around a reef, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about religion and legends. So, coral reefs in our world have already spawned a whole host of legends. If you think about all the pirate hideouts and the creatures of the deep and sea nymphs and sirens and so on, they all come from areas like coral reefs. But in a fantasy world, the reefs might actually be home to guardian creatures, mythical beings tasked with protecting these underwater paradises. Think of ancient guardians like sea nymphs or merfolks, entities that are part coral and part creature, embodying the essence of the reef. Their stories could be one of eternal vigilance against threats, both natural and supernatural. We've certainly got plenty of myths and legends in our world, so you should probably have a couple in yours, even if they are fake stories like our merfolk and just tales told around a campfire. From a religious aspect, for some, the reef itself could be a living embodiment of their deity. The reef could become what is, in some religions, the Mother Earth goddess figure. The reef could take that place and be that mother figure. Or you could have a pantheon of deities where you have different aspects of the reef. A god of the deep water, a goddess of the corals, a deity of the fish, and so on. Or you could also go with a more animism approach where every part of the reef has a spirit. So you've got a lot of options in terms of the central figure of your religion. Then, as I said, I do think that the rituals would follow the rhythm of the reef, with things like fertility rites happening when the coral spawns and so on. I also think the moon would be critically important in these kinds of religions because the moon controls the tide, and of course a coral reef environment, the tide has a great impact. So certainly consider the impact of the moon on your religious rites and the activities and cultural festivals of your people. By weaving in legends and mythical creatures and religions into your coral reef societies, you build a rich, multi-layered narrative. These stories can be things that your characters tell each other, and that enhances your world, showing how these cultures live. Coral reefs, in their complex beauty and ecological diversity, are more than just backdrops. They can be living, breathing settings that can inspire stories and shape cultures and birth legends. When you're building a coral reef in your world, think about them as a source of magic and mystery. Can you use them in your magic system? What legends will spawn from them? What terrible creatures live down there? What themes do they feed in your world? And those are my thoughts on coral reefs in fantasy worlds. This video has been brought to you by the amazing members of my channel, who are the coral reefs that shape my diversity. If you would like to join their ranks for as little as €3 a month, you can get access to these great perks. But please don't feel obligated to support the channel financially. You can also support the channel just by watching another video. Since you enjoyed this one, you might also enjoy my video on pirates in a fantasy world. Or you can trust the algorithm's recommendation right over there. And I'll take my Octo back now and see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.